You need to move out by Friday. The wedding planner needs the house cleared so we can start setting up the ceremony space. I stood frozen in my own driveway, keys still in my hand, staring at my stepmother Victoria as she directed a team of workers carrying furniture out of my oceanfront home. Behind her, my half-brother David was on his phone, gesturing toward my custom-built deck that overlooked the Pacific, while his fiancée Sarah measured the living room I had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows to capture the sunrise over the water. My mind reeled as I watched strangers handle my belongings with casual indifference. The leather sectional I had commissioned from an Italian craftsman was being loaded onto a truck. The dining table I had designed myself, crafted from reclaimed driftwood found on this very beach, was wrapped in moving blankets. This was my home, every inch of it planned, designed and paid for with money I had earned building my tech consulting firm from nothing. The same firm that had generated enough revenue to purchase this 3-acre beachfront property and construct the 500-square-foot modern retreat that now housed my half-brother's wedding preparations instead of my life. As I stood there, a devastating realization crashed over me like the waves against my private shoreline. In that moment, the foundation beneath their feet, this house they assumed was theirs to command, the same property I had purchased and developed entirely with my own earnings, was about to shift. They just didn't know it yet. The empire they thought they could simply claim was built on something far more solid than family manipulation, legal documentation, financial records, and the ironclad proof of individual ownership. I had driven down from San Francisco for what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend at my retreat. After 3 intense months launching a major client project, I needed the solitude of my oceanfront sanctuary. The 2-hour drive along Highway 1 usually cleared my mind, but today the familiar curves and coastal views couldn't shake my exhaustion. I had planned to spend the weekend reviewing architectural plans for a potential expansion of the house, maybe a guest cottage or an art studio where I could pursue the photography hobby I never had time for in the city. The financial reality of this property was straightforward and entirely mine. 2 years ago, when my consulting firm landed its biggest contract, a $2.8 million digital transformation project for a Fortune 500 company, I had finally achieved the financial stability to pursue my dream of oceanfront living. I purchased the raw land for $1, $4 million, then spent another $1, $8 million on construction, using a combination of business profits, investment returns, and a construction loan that I had personally guaranteed. My father, William, had provided a single $75,000 loan during the final phase when a client payment was delayed. But I had repaid that amount in full within 6 weeks, complete with interest. Every permit, every contractor payment, every design decision had been mine alone. There's been a misunderstanding, I said, walking toward Victoria with forced calm, though my heart was pounding. This is my house. I need everyone to stop what they're doing and leave immediately. Victoria turned to me with the condescending smile I had come to know well over the 15 years since she married my father. Oh, Marcus, don't be dramatic. Your father explained everything. This house has always been intended as a family investment, and David needs it more than you do. You have your apartment in the city, my apartment, a modest 1-bedroom in Soma that I kept for work week convenience. Nothing compared to this oceanfront masterpiece that represented years of sacrifice and planning. I watched as 2 men struggled to remove my custom-built entertainment center, the one that housed my vinyl collection and high-end audio equipment. "Stop!" I called out to them. "Put that down. This is my property and you don't have permission to be here." The workers looked confused, glancing between Victoria and me. David ended his phone call and approached us, his expression shifting from annoyed to defensive. "Marcus, Dad already talked to you about this. The house works perfectly for our wedding and Sarah loves the master suite. You're being selfish by making this difficult." "Talk to me about what?" I demanded. "When exactly did Dad discuss giving away my house?" The question hung in the air because no such conversation had ever occurred. What had happened was months of my father making casual comments about David needing to settle down and how family wealth should be shared, but never anything approaching a direct discussion about transferring ownership of my property. Sarah emerged from inside the house, her arms full of my personal items, books, photographs, even my coffee maker. "Oh good, you're here," she said brightly. "I wanted to ask about keeping some of these built-in shelves. They're perfect for displaying our wedding gifts." She held up a framed photograph of me accepting an industry award for innovative business solutions. "Though we'll probably want to redecorate with our own memories." The casual entitlement in her voice was staggering. I gently took the photograph from her hands, along with the other items she was carrying. "Sarah, I don't know what David and his family have told you, but this house isn't available for your wedding or anything else. It's my home. David's face flushed red. Come on, Marcus. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Dad's already signed the paperwork transferring ownership. The house legally belongs to me now. He pulled out his phone. I can show you the documentation. What documentation? I asked, though a cold dread was settling in my stomach. My father was a successful real estate developer who understood contracts and legal processes. If he was claiming to have transferred ownership, there might be something I wasn't aware of. Some legal maneuver I hadn't anticipated. Victoria stepped closer, her voice taking on a maternal tone that felt like mockery. Marcus, honey, you have to understand this from a family perspective. David is getting married, starting a family. This house is perfect for children, for holidays, for building traditions. You're a single man focused on your career. It just makes more sense for the property to be with David and Sarah. I looked around at my home being dismantled by strangers, while my family stood there expecting gratitude for their theft. My gaze fell on the infinity pool I had designed to blend seamlessly with the ocean horizon, the outdoor kitchen where I had planned to host client dinners, the spiral staircase leading to the rooftop deck where I sometimes worked late into the night with only the sound of waves for company. This wasn't just about real estate or family politics. This was about the systematic erasure of my accomplishments, my independence, my right to exist as an individual rather than just a resource for David's convenience. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling my attorney. Everyone needs to leave this property immediately, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. David laughed, but there was nervousness in it. You're really going to call the cops on your own family? Over a house Dad has every right to give me? Yes, I said simply, already dialing, because this isn't Dad's house to give. Within 20 minutes, my attorney Patricia Hendricks was on a conference call, her voice cutting through the coastal wind as I stood on my deck, watching the movers reluctantly halt their work. Marcus, walk me through this again. They claim your father has transferred ownership? That's what David says, I replied, keeping my voice low as Victoria and David huddled near their car, clearly making phone calls of their own. He says Dad signed paperwork, but I've never seen any documentation, and I certainly never agreed to any transfer. Patricia's voice was firm and reassuring. Unless you signed a quitclaim deed or some other transfer document, your father cannot unilaterally transfer property that's titled in your name. Real estate ownership doesn't work that way. If David has documentation, I need to see it immediately. I walked back toward the group, Patricia still on the line. David, my attorney would like to see this documentation you mentioned. Can you show us what you're referring to? David's confident demeanor wavered slightly. He scrolled through his phone, then showed me a text message thread between him and our father. The messages discussed plans for David to take over the beach house after the wedding and referenced transfer documents being prepared, but there were no actual legal papers, no signatures, no official documentation of any kind. These are just text messages, I said, showing the phone to Patricia through video call. There's no legal document here. Patricia's voice was sharp. Text messages about future plans don't constitute a property transfer. David, do you have a deed, a contract, any notarized document showing ownership transfer? David's face was now clearly showing panic. He looked toward Victoria, who was ending her own phone call with obvious frustration. Dad said he would handle the legal aspects. He said it was already taken care of. Well, it's not, Patricia said bluntly. Marcus, you need to document everything that's happening right now. Take photos of any items that have been removed, get names of the moving company, and make it clear that these people are trespassing on private property. As I began photographing the scene, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my father. I ignored it, but it immediately rang again. On the third call, I answered, putting it on speaker so Patricia could hear. Marcus, what the hell is going on down there? William's voice was tight with anger. David called me saying you're being completely unreasonable about the house transfer. What house transfer, Dad? I asked calmly. Because I've never agreed to transfer my house to anyone. We discussed this months ago, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The house is too much for one person. David needs it for his family. We never discussed transferring ownership, I corrected. You've made comments about David needing to settle down, but we've never had any conversation about giving him my house. And even if we had, you can't transfer property that belongs to me, Patricia's voice cut in. Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Hendricks, Marcus's attorney. Can you explain what legal authority you believe gives you the right to transfer property titled solely in your son's name? The line went quiet for several long seconds. When William spoke again, his tone was defensive. I'm his father. I helped with the construction costs. That gives me certain rights. Actually, it doesn't, Patricia replied firmly. I have all of Marcus's financial records regarding this property. You provided a temporary loan of $75, Sur Zero, which was repaid in full within 6 weeks. That loan doesn't create ownership interest, especially once it's been repaid. I could hear my father's breathing over the phone, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Finally, he said, "This is a family matter. It should be handled within the family." Attempted theft of real estate isn't a family matter, Patricia responded. It's a legal matter. I suggest you advise David and his associates to remove themselves from Marcus's property immediately before we involve law enforcement. After I hung up, David stared at me with an expression mixing anger and disbelief. You're really going to choose property over family? I'm choosing reality over fantasy, I replied. This house is mine. I bought it, I built it, I live in it. Your assumption that you could simply take it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of both property law and respect for other people's achievements. Sarah, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, finally spoke up. David, maybe we should look at other venues. This feels really complicated. Victoria's mask of maternal concern had completely slipped, revealing cold calculation underneath. Marcus, you're making a serious mistake. Family loyalty goes both ways. When you need support someday, remember this moment. I'll remember it, I said quietly. As the day I learned to protect myself from people who think they're entitled to the fruits of my labor simply because we share DNA. As the movers began loading my furniture back into the house, I felt a strange mixture of victory and sadness. I had defended my property successfully, but the cost was the final destruction of any illusion that my father's family saw me as anything more than a resource to be exploited for David's benefit. The sun was beginning to set over the Pacific, painting my windows gold, and for the first time that day, I felt the peace this place was meant to provide. But I also knew this battle was far from over. The week following the confrontation brought a siege of family pressure unlike anything I had experienced. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from my father, Victoria, and even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all somehow convinced that I was being unreasonably selfish about family property. On Tuesday morning, as I sat in my San Francisco office reviewing client proposals, my assistant Jennifer knocked on my door. Marcus, there's a woman here claiming to be your stepmother. She says it's urgent family business. Through my office window, I could see Victoria in the reception area, dressed in her usual designer attire, speaking animatedly to Jennifer. I sighed, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. Send her in, but stay close in case I need you to call security. Victoria entered my office with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting her way through intimidation. She settled into the chair across from my desk without invitation, placing her expensive handbag on the floor with deliberate precision. Marcus, we need to discuss this situation like adults, she began, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when attempting manipulation. Your father is extremely upset, and David is having to completely restart his wedding planning because of your stubbornness. I leaned back in my chair, studying her carefully. Victoria, let me be very clear about something. My house is not David's backup plan for poor wedding preparation. It's my home, my investment, my property. The fact that you and David assumed you could simply take it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of basic property rights. It's not that simple, she insisted, crossing her legs and leaning forward slightly. Your father has significant emotional and financial investment in that property. He views it as part of his legacy, something that should benefit the entire family. His emotional investment doesn't create legal ownership, I replied calmly, and his financial investment consisted of a single loan that was repaid in full. I have all the documentation proving that every other penny came from my business profits. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Family isn't just about legal documentation, Marcus. It's about loyalty, about supporting each other, about understanding that some people have greater needs than others. David is starting a family. You're a successful businessman with resources. Surely you can understand why the house makes more sense for them. The audacity of her argument was breathtaking. So, because I've been successful, I should give away my achievements to David? Because I've worked hard and saved money, I should subsidize his lifestyle choices? You're being deliberately obtuse, Victoria snapped, her veneer of reasonableness beginning to crack. This isn't about subsidizing anyone. It's about family unity. Your father has always believed in sharing family resources, and this house represents a significant family resource. No, I said firmly. It represents my personal resource that I created through my own work. The fact that you can't distinguish between family resources and individual property is exactly why this conversation is pointless. Victoria stood up abruptly, her composure finally breaking. Fine. If you want to be selfish and ungrateful, that's your choice. But don't expect family support when you need it. Don't expect invitations to family gatherings. Don't expect to be welcome at David's wedding or any future family events. I stood as well, walking to my office door and opening it. Victoria, I've learned something important this week. People who love you don't threaten to withdraw that love as leverage to get what they want. They don't attempt to steal your property and then call you selfish for defending it. So your threats of exclusion actually sound like promises of peace. Her face flushed red with anger and surprise. Clearly, she had expected her ultimatum to bring me to heel, not to be dismissed so completely. As she gathered her handbag and stalked toward the door, she turned back one final time. You'll regret this, Marcus. Family is all you really have in the end. If family means people who lie, steal, and manipulate, I replied calmly, then I'd rather have chosen relationships built on mutual respect instead. After she left, I sat back down at my desk and called Patricia. They're escalating the pressure campaign, I told her, recounting Victoria's visit. I think we need to be prepared for them to try more serious measures. I agree, Patricia said. I'm going to prepare a cease and desist letter regarding any further attempts to claim your property. I'm also going to recommend that you consider changing the locks and installing a security system at the beach house. If they were willing to bring movers without your permission once, they might try it again. That evening, I drove back down to my beach house, carrying a bag of new locks and a security system I had ordered online. As I worked to secure my property, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. Sadness that it had come to this, that my own family required legal protection from their greed, but liberation from the constant pressure to accommodate David's needs at the expense of my own accomplishments. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves against the shore and sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows I had specifically positioned to capture the sunrise. As I sat on my deck with coffee, reviewing the architecture plans for the potential studio addition, my phone rang. It was David. Marcus, we need to talk, he said, his voice lacking its usual entitled confidence. Can I come by the house? Just me, not Mom or Dad. I hesitated, then agreed. Something in his tone suggested this might be different from the previous confrontations. David arrived an hour later, driving alone and looking genuinely uncomfortable. As we sat on the deck overlooking the ocean, he was quiet for several long minutes before finally speaking. I owe you an apology, he said, staring out at the water. A serious one. I got caught up in Mom's plans and Dad's promises, and I never stopped to think about what this meant for you. I waited, sensing there was more. The truth is, David continued, I never really understood how much work you put into building your business, earning the money for this place, designing it, overseeing the construction. To me, it was just this house that appeared. And when Mom suggested it would be perfect for our wedding and Dad said he could arrange it, I didn't question the ethics of it. And now? I asked. David sighed heavily. Now I realize we were basically planning to steal your life's work. And the worst part is, we convinced ourselves it was justified because you're successful, and we assumed you didn't need it as much as we did. David's admission hung in the salt air between us, as waves crashed against the rocks below my deck. This was the first genuine accountability I had heard from anyone in my father's family since the entire nightmare began. I need you to understand something, I said carefully, studying David's face for signs of manipulation or insincerity. This isn't just about the house. It's about the assumption that my achievements are somehow communal property, that my success obligates me to subsidize everyone else's choices. David nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to understand that. Sarah and I spent the weekend looking at actual wedding venues, places we can afford ourselves, and it occurred to me that we never even considered whether we could afford this house as our own home. We just assumed it would be given to us. And how did that feel? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Embarrassing, he admitted. Really embarrassing. I'm 28 years old, I have a decent job, Sarah has her career, and we were planning our future around a house we expected to receive as a gift. When I really thought about it, I realized how entitled and immature that sounds. I appreciated his honesty, but years of David receiving preferential treatment from our father had left me cautious about accepting apologies too quickly. David, I need to ask you directly. Do you understand that this house is mine, legally and ethically, and that no one has any right to take it or give it away? Yes, he said firmly. Absolutely. And I need to tell you something else. I talked to Dad yesterday and told him I wasn't interested in any arrangement involving your house. He wasn't happy about it. This surprised me. How did he react? David's expression darkened. He accused me of being manipulated by you. He said you've always been jealous of our family, and that you're using the house situation to drive a wedge between us. He's still convinced that his loan gives him some kind of ownership stake, but you know that's not true. I know it's not true, David confirmed. I actually called a real estate attorney friend of mine to ask about it. He explained that repaid loans don't create ownership interest, and that property transfer requires the owner's signature. Dad's claims are legally baseless. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a pelican dive for fish in the waves. Finally, David spoke again. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Have I always been this entitled? Have I always expected things to be handed to me? I considered his question carefully. You've been raised in an environment where you rarely had to face the consequences of your choices. Dad and Victoria always found ways to solve your problems with money or connections. It's not entirely your fault that you developed certain expectations, but it is my responsibility to recognize it and change it, David said. Sarah and I have been talking a lot since this happened. We've decided to postpone the wedding for a few months while we figure out our own financial situation and find a venue we can actually afford ourselves. This was the most mature decision I had ever heard David make. How do you feel about that? Nervous, he admitted, but also kind of excited. For the first time, we're planning something that's completely ours, not dependent on family money or family property. It feels more real somehow. My phone buzzed with a text message from our father. David better not be over there filling your head with nonsense. We need to settle this family business properly. David saw me reading and grimaced. He's been texting me constantly, too. He's really angry that I'm not supporting his position anymore. Are you prepared for that pressure? I asked, because I can tell you from experience that Dad doesn't give up easily when he wants something. I'm learning that, David replied, but I think I need to learn to deal with his pressure anyway. I can't keep letting him solve my problems for me and then feeling obligated to go along with his solutions. As the afternoon progressed, David and I talked more honestly than we had in years. He asked about my business, about the challenges of building a company from scratch, about the sacrifices I had made to afford this property. In return, I learned about his own career frustrations, his feeling of being constantly in our father's shadow, and his growing recognition that financial independence required more than just expectations of family support. Can I ask you something else? David said as the sun began to lower toward the horizon. Would you be willing to help Sarah and me understand how to budget for a house purchase? Not asking for money or anything like that, just advice on how to approach it systematically. I was touched by the question. Of course, I'd be happy to help with that. As David prepared to leave, he paused at his car. Marcus, I know this doesn't fix everything immediately, but I want you to know that I respect what you've built here. Not just the house, but your whole life. I hope we can build a better relationship going forward. I'd like that too, I said, and meant it. After David left, I called Patricia to update her on the conversation. It sounds like David is genuinely trying to step back from the situation, she said. But be careful. Sometimes family members will appear to concede while working behind the scenes to get what they want. I thought of that too, I admitted. But something about this felt different, more genuine. I hope you're right, Patricia said. But keep documenting everything and don't let your guard down completely. Your father still hasn't acknowledged that his claims are baseless. That evening, as I sat in my hot tub watching stars appear over the Pacific, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. David's acknowledgement couldn't undo the betrayal or instantly repair years of dysfunctional family dynamics, but it offered a foundation for something healthier in the future. My phone buzzed with another text from my father, this one more aggressive than the previous messages. If you think turning David against his own family is going to work, you're mistaken. This house situation will be resolved one way or another. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Patricia with a note. Still escalating. She replied immediately, document everything. We may need this later. As I looked out over my property, the infinity pool reflecting starlight, the modern lines of the house I had designed, the native plantings I had carefully selected for the coastal environment, I felt a deep sense of ownership that went beyond legal documentation. This wasn't just a house I had purchased. It was a vision I had created, a dream I had brought to reality through years of focused effort. No one had the right to take that away from me, regardless of family relationships or emotional manipulation. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt confident that I had the strength to protect what was mine. 3 months after David's apology, I received an unexpected phone call that would bring this family drama to its final resolution. I was in my San Francisco office, deep in preparation for a major client presentation, when Patricia called with news that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "Your father has filed a civil lawsuit claiming partial ownership of your beach house. He's alleging that his $75 $100 contribution constituted an investment rather than a loan, and he's seeking a court order to force the sale of the property so he can claim his supposed share." I sat back in my chair, stunned. "But we have documentation that it was a loan. We have the repayment records. We have his text acknowledging receipt." "We do," Patricia confirmed, "but he's claiming that the loan documentation was incomplete and that there was a verbal agreement about ownership sharing. He's also alleging that you've been living rent-free in what he considers partially his property." The audacity was breathtaking even by my father's standards. "How strong is his case?" "Legally, it's weak," Patricia assured me. "Property law requires written documentation for ownership claims, and his repaid loan doesn't create equity interest. But lawsuits are expensive and time-consuming, even when you win. I suspect this is a pressure tactic designed to force you into some kind of settlement." That evening, I drove down to the beach house feeling emotionally drained. The place that had been my sanctuary was now the center of legal warfare with my own family. As I sat on my deck watching the sunset, my phone rang. It was David. "Marcus, I just heard about Dad's lawsuit," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I had no idea he was planning this. Sarah and I are horrified." "Are you?" I asked carefully. "Because your support has been inconsistent in the past." "I understand why you doubt me," David replied, "but I need you to know that I think this lawsuit is completely wrong. I've told Dad that I won't support it in any way, and I've offered to be a witness for you if needed." This surprised me. A witness for what? To testify that I was present when you repaid the loan, that I heard Dad acknowledge it was a loan rather than an investment, and that I witnessed his text message accepting repayment. I also have emails where he refers to it as a loan that you paid back. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt genuine hope. "David, that could be crucial evidence. Are you sure you're willing to testify against Dad?" "I'm sure," David said firmly. "What he's doing is wrong, and I'm not going to enable it anymore. Sarah and I have found our own place, by the way, a small house in Petaluma that we can actually afford ourselves. We're excited about it." Over the next few weeks, as Patricia prepared our defense, an interesting pattern emerged. David wasn't the only family member who was uncomfortable with my father's escalating tactics. My Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, called to express his concerns. "Marcus, your father has always been stubborn, but this lawsuit crosses a line," Robert said during our phone conversation. "I've seen the text messages where he acknowledges receiving repayment of the loan. His claim of ownership interest is factually baseless. Would you be willing to testify to that?" I asked. "Absolutely," Robert replied. "Family loyalty doesn't mean supporting family members when they're clearly in the wrong." As word of the lawsuit spread through our extended family and my father's business associates, the response was overwhelmingly critical of his actions. Several of his real estate industry colleagues quietly reached out to express their professional opinion that his claims were without merit and potentially damaging to his reputation. The depositions were scheduled for 6 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. As we prepared, Patricia compiled an overwhelming amount of evidence supporting my position: bank records, construction contracts, permit applications, loan documentation, repayment records, and testimony from multiple witnesses, including David, Robert, and my construction manager, Derek. 2 days before the depositions were scheduled to begin, my father's attorney called Patricia with a settlement offer. "They want to drop the lawsuit in exchange for $200, $1,000, Patricia told me. "They're calling it compensation for his contribution to the property." I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely not. We're not rewarding attempted extortion with a cash payment." "I was hoping you'd say that," Patricia replied, "because I think we're going to win this case decisively, and I want to send a message that frivolous lawsuits have consequences." The depositions revealed the weakness of my father's position even more clearly than we had expected. Under oath, He was forced to admit that he had acknowledged the $75,000 as a loan, that he had accepted repayment in full, and that he had never been involved in any aspect of purchasing, designing, or constructing the house beyond that single temporary loan. When David testified, his account was clear and unshakable. He had witnessed conversations where our father referred to the $75,000 as a loan. He had seen the repayment transaction. He had heard our father acknowledge that the house belonged entirely to me. The most damaging moment came when my father's attorney asked him to produce any documentation showing an ownership agreement. He couldn't, because none existed. After the depositions, Patricia was confident. His attorney knows they have no case. I expect them to withdraw the lawsuit within the week. She was right. 5 days later, my father's attorney filed a motion to dismiss, withdrawing all claims. But the victory felt hollow. Legal vindication couldn't repair the fundamental breach of trust that had occurred. A month after the lawsuit was dismissed, I received an unexpected visitor at my beach house. It was my father, arriving alone and looking older than I remembered. "Can we talk?" he asked, his usual commanding presence notably absent. We sat on my deck, the same place where this entire confrontation had begun months earlier. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. "I was wrong," he finally said, his voice quiet. "About the lawsuit, about the house, about treating your achievements as if they were family assets. I was wrong about all of it." I waited, sensing there was more. "The truth is," he continued, "I've been struggling financially for the past 2 years. Some investments went bad and I made some poor decisions. When David needed help with wedding expenses and you had built this beautiful property, it seemed logical to find a way to share resources. But they weren't shared resources," I said. "They were my resources that you tried to claim without permission." "I know that now," he admitted. "The lawsuit was my attempt to salvage some dignity after my plan failed, but all it did was make everything worse. I've lost the respect of my colleagues, damaged my relationship with David, and probably destroyed any chance of repairing things with you." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and the recognition of consequences. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'd like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with you, but I understand if that's not possible. I just wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was." We talked for another hour, not reaching any dramatic reconciliation, but achieving something that felt like the beginning of honesty. My father left with no promises, except that he wouldn't interfere with my property or my life again. 6 months later, I hosted a housewarming party for David and Sarah's new home in Petaluma. It was modest compared to my beach house, but it was entirely theirs, purchased with their own savings and financed with their own credit. The pride in David's voice as he showed guests around was genuine in a way I had never heard before. "It's not much," he said to me as we stood in his small backyard, "but every square foot belongs to us." "It's perfect," I replied, and meant it. As I drove back to my beach house that evening, I reflected on everything that had changed. The legal victory had been important, but the real transformation was deeper. I had learned to defend my boundaries, my achievements, and my right to exist as an individual rather than just a family resource. David had learned to build his own life rather than expecting others to provide it. And my father had learned that family relationships couldn't survive attempts to claim what didn't belong to him. My beach house remained my sanctuary, more precious now for having been defended. But more importantly, it represented something beyond property ownership. It symbolized the right to keep what you build, to protect what you create, and to maintain boundaries that preserve both your achievements and your dignity. Standing on my deck that night, watching moonlight dance on the Pacific waves, I felt a peace that went deeper than legal victory or family reconciliation. I felt the satisfaction of someone who had refused to surrender their life's work to others' sense of entitlement, and who had emerged stronger for the fight.